Bam.
This is Tim Tortora, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, man, this is fun. We get to do and talk to a lot of people here on the Break It Down show, and I think your background is very timely because the world of getting paid to create things on a large scale has exploded. There are so many different production companies now, so many different companies desperately hungry for content that we can consume, and so that means that people need to know this industry. And as you know, this industry is fantastic if you figure it out, but it definitely takes its bite on the way up as you do it. So you've created a big body of knowledge on what to do and how to survive in this business, and then maybe even how to thrive.
Yeah, everything you say is true. This is a hard business. It's easy to create. It's really hard to create content that people are willing to open their wallet for. And that's the distinction between creating and making a living. And that's a hard
Yeah,
thing.
it is a hard thing. I'm in between those things, right? Like my show is very, very successful. I mean, I got you on my show. It's all kinds of incredible people have been on the show. We make a little bit of money here, make a little bit of money, but the eyeballs, the earballs that you have to gather, and then also the algorithm doesn't want to support things like this show. And I'm not making complaints or anything. I'm just there's a fact that getting people's attention is very challenging. Probably as challenging as it's ever been. And then you see stuff that does resonate, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what it takes right here. This negative thing, this non-creative thing, taking
Yeah.
somebody else's content and making nothing really new except for using somebody else's content to boy, man, it's a crazy world.
Well, I think Jon Stewart puts it best, which is the business model of all of the social channels, and includes YouTube. It's a social channel. They're all built on the concept of arson, and you just gotta burn stuff down to create eyeballs and make a living. And I don't know how much longer that lasts. I mean, there's certainly that's been the case for a long time, going back to the beginning of the nation, even when we used to
Right.
we meaning Americans used to publish pamphlets, and they were always very salacious and nasty about other people. And I don't think that's changed much, but I
Okay.
do think folks are tiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how
And
much
you
longer that'll last.
yeah, well, I mean, there's always going to be this struggle just in different levels of prevalence, and then also different levels of ferociousness. There's waves, and we're in one right now that we're trying to figure out how to get through it. And again, I keep harping on like the Last Dance documentary that was on ESPN. Now it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
You watch that, then you go on to YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, and people take clips of it, little short clips of someone else's work, and then maybe they say, something about Michael. Maybe they don't say anything, and they just take a clip, and they start developing an audience based
Yeah.
upon entirely someone else's work and their ability to do a 2-minute edit, because there's nothing fancy in this edit. Matter of fact, a lot of times it's zoomed in, and it's even worse than the original content itself.
Yeah. It's true, and it's intellectual property theft. And I would love to build a business like YouTube did, based on stealing shit. I would. That'd be easy. If I could go down to Walmart and steal goods and sell it on my front door and pocket the
Yeah,
cash, that's
yeah,
essentially what it is. And I don't, the certainly the people we work for, the studios, the networks, the record
right.
industry, the RIAA, they all tried to stop it, but it's a whack-a-mole problem, and I don't know how it ends, honestly.
And let's go to the other side of that then. The RIAA, the studios, Sony, whoever, they deserve quite a bit of contempt. They've done a lot of very questionable things over the years. I mean, if you work for a label, well, let's say Sony because they're a label. If you work for them and they say, "Hey, congratulations, you sold 8 million albums last year," and you're like, "Hey, by our count, we sold 29 million albums. What happened?" They're like,
Yeah,
"Well, we can go to court and figure it out,"
yeah.
and then you're like, "I get it," and so you're laughing because that shit's true.
I'm laughing because I get probably so I have a half dozen clients who I continue to work with who make TV shows and movies, and every single one of them have participation, and they receive participation statements on probably I see on a regular basis anywhere from 150 to 300 statements, depending on the period, whether it's annual, quarter, or monthly. And every single one of those statements says, I shouldn't say every single one, but 95% of them say, "Oh my God, we made a whole bunch of money. But you know what? We're so sorry you don't get to participate.
You didn't get enough.
We didn't sell enough and our expenses were too high." But the truth is that that system, it's not shady. it's unusual. It's not. It used to be criminal, right? Clive Davis got busted when he was at, I think, Capitol, putting through his. I think it was Clive Davis. I may have the name wrong, but he was putting personal expenses through the company. He had put his kid's bar mitzvah on
Right.
the record label, and that wound up on someone's statement, and he got busted for it, and they wound up having to pay out the artist. But that doesn't really happen anymore. These are huge conglomerates that are with under other bigger businesses that just don't want to get sued. So
Yeah.
they're a lot more honest, but there's still someone deciding who to assign a cost to. And that does happen. And it happens regularly. And we audit them, and sometimes we win, sometimes we find some money, but it's expensive. So
It is
my
expensive.
advice to everybody is you're not going to renegotiate the terms. Get as much money as you can up front and just expect that you're going to get hosed in the end. And if you don't, bonus.
And if you're fantastically successful, you get to negotiate better and better deals each
Correct.
cycle, you know?
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, like when Willie Nelson had total control and he's like, here's Redheaded Stranger. And they're like, is this a demo? And he's like, nope. Check the contract. That's the album. And then it turns out it was great because he's Willie Nelson. He knows what he's doing.
Right.
And I do want to say this too. So the accounting has for sure gotten better, but there's also we had Lorenzo Lamas on the show,
Yeah.
and he was talking about Renegade, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Look, Renegade was a good show. I go out to the mailbox, great checks in there, and then someone else bought it, and they put that show to work, and they beat the rest of the life out of it, so
Yeah.
that it's just not you can't sell it anymore. Like they just overdid, at least for that era of time, right? And so you also have that side too, where someone's like, we can make money on this, and they do, and then your ability to make money after that, goes away. What are your thoughts on just abusing the hell out of something?
These are enterprises that are rapacious, and their job is to try to make their money back. Using the Lorenzo Lamas and Renegade is a great example. You couldn't turn on a television and not
Oh my
see
God.
his face on some syndicated program on a weekend or at night, right? For
Right,
going
right.
on a decade and a half.
Oh my God, yeah, yeah.
And once you get down into 100, 200 runs of a particular title, they're making pennies. In fact, there's a bar here in LA called Residuals, and if you bring a residual check that is any amount of money, they will give you a well drink for that check. You sign it over to the bar. So if you get a 57-cent check, which is
Yeah,
the minimum at SAG,
yeah,
if you get a 57-cent check, you can get a drink from the bar, right? So
yeah.
that's kind of an amusing example, but the truth is artists are not making any money, and it is the job of the people who make and finance content to make as much money as they possibly can, right? They have to maximize their business, and they're going to do that. So you have to expect it's going to happen. I personally, my personal feeling is we're all adults. We understand the game.
Yeah.
When you make a paycheck and you sell something to a distributor, you should expect them to be rapacious and put it everywhere they can. You're going to be on the side of a bus, on a billboard. You're going to be on every single platform, in the airplane, wherever you go. And if
Right.
you don't like that, then don't play the game.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
flip side of that is direct in something a drum I've been beating for a year and a half, which is direct to consumer for artists is going to be the future. And the gatekeepers and the studios, the networks, the record companies, they all are realizing that they're not so much the gatekeepers anymore. Billie Eilish is a great example. They had 200 million views before they ever signed a record label deal.
Right. Yeah.
So here's a couple of artists who really figured out how to do it. The problem with most artists is they don't think in terms of business. They're just like, oh, I get to do my art. Cool. How much you gonna give me?
Right.
I'll give you a nickel.
I'm so glad you said this. I wanted to bring this up because, well, my my camera's lean. I'll just lean with my camera. Um, w- the reality is that, yeah, the creative side, and as you get more successful, you get to do less and less of what you want to do, or pay dearly to have someone else to do the things you don't want to do.
Yeah.
So we had on a guy yesterday. He's wonderful. His name's Paul Hansen, and he plays the bassoon like Jimi Hendrix. He puts effects pedals on it, and he can
Oh,
do
that's cool.
all these incredible things. It's super incredible. But if he wants to be able to tour as a soloist in front of symphonies, he's got to hire an agent. He's got to pay that person to go out and sell him,
Yep.
and he's got to like say no to other projects. And all of a sudden, he's like spending a lot of time on the road, and he's successful and he's playing, but he's also not being as creative as he wants to be. He's in this really weird conundrum where he's got this incredible thing that is absolutely marketable, but it's very hard to run a small business on top of his other small business, and be creative. These things, you start to run out of time. And that aspect of, hey, I don't need you guys that much. Like Sony comes to you and like, hey, we have a contract for you because you have an audience. You're like, but I have an audience, so I don't need a contract.
Yeah. It's a friction. The one common thread in all the creatives I've ever seen be successful in both records and movies and TV is once they're in the creative, they can do nothing else but that thing. And to say that you can do multiple things, marketing, distribution, create, you just can't. It's just not possible. And the people who are successful, they surround themselves with people they trust, and they surround themselves with people who have their business and their brand, because you're essentially an entrepreneur when you're a creative. That is what you are. You surround yourself with people who are on your side. Sometimes it's agents, sometimes it's a lawyer or a manager. The studio, the network, the distributor, they're not on your side. They're on the side of selling widgets, right? But
Right.
and it's a friction. It's really hard to overcome. And I think most artists are done a huge disservice in from the people who train them. And I mean like the film programs and the music programs around the country and around the world, which is find your voice, fly your freak flag and do whatever you want to do that feeds your soul. Bullshit. That should be 10% of your life. That should be 10% of your education. The 90% should be, how do I find people who are good at marketing, who are good at distribution, who are good at finance and legal? How do I get them on my team to work for me so that I can operate a business? And operating a business is revenue on the top, expenses through the funnel, down the bottom comes profit. That's what you get to take home. That's the binary world we live in. And until that changes, you got to understand it and learn it, and then put your creative on top of that so that you can sell.
Man, I'm so glad you said that. Your team. We have to ask the question is to tee you up. This is love what works like this. One of the big people that's known for this, and this may be hard for people to hear or to even talk about. Bill Cosby, like he would take his peers, especially African Americans, and say, "Here is how you run your money in this business."
Yeah,
A third for taxes, a third for paying bills, and a third for goofing around with whatever. And retirement is in there. And he's like, you have to do this. And I'm making that equation up, but he would explain this to his peers so that they could protect themselves when the times get lean. They could protect themselves when the industry changed their mind about them. And he really did a lot to teach people how to run an actual business because nobody really knows that when you come to Hollywood. Yeah, you're like, I look great. I can read some lines. I feel like I'm a good actor. Okay, great. But how do you run this business? How do those things it's exceptionally hard. And the people that teach you may not be the first person you meet. You might meet a marketing person. They're like, I can do this. And they cannot. You have to
true.
pay them a lot of money to find out that they can't do it.
Yeah, and the other person who's a bit of a more interesting personality is Shaquille O'Neal. Does a great
Yeah.
demonstration for folks. He takes a piece of paper and he tears it in half, and he
Yeah.
says, "This half is the money that you're going to spend. The other half you're going to hang on to, and you're going to put it away for retirement, and you're going to do whatever you want with it. But you have to understand that 50% of the money is going to be you're going to spend it, but the other 50% you're going to put away." And he tears that 50% in half, and he says, of the 50% you have left, you're going to put 25% in retirement, 25% into savings, and you're going to let that retirement work for you over
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
compounding interest. Great analogy. I would say it's probably closer to a third, a third, a third, like you said. And
Yeah.
if you can survive on only spending 25% of what you make or less, you're going to you're going to have long-term longevity in the business. And I think finding people when you come to Hollywood, it's an interesting problem. You, especially actors and directors to some extent, but certainly actors and writers less so. You're surrounded by people who are by and large sycophants. And they're going to tell you you're amazing, and they're going to tell you, "Oh, I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. You don't have to even think about this." You should be thinking about it. You should pay attention to it, and you really should care about it. And that means hiring people, getting people on your team who have this way of thinking for you or with you that is
Right.
more about a business and an entrepreneurial effort, and not just like, yeah, show up with a pretty face. Otherwise, you're just going to get eaten alive.
Yeah.
The best axiom I ever heard about Hollywood is Hollywood's like a tiger. It likes to eat its young.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Shaq
Sure.
has a thing he calls, I think it's the council as well,
Mm,
and it's like his mom and people who have always known him and aren't afraid to tell him, I don't think you should do this, or I think you're wrong here, or whatever it is. And then he considers their decision. But yeah, he's done really well with this council approach as well, where you're insulated from Hollywood by not going to Hollywood for answers, you know?
Yeah, Hollywood's great for at business. They take art, which is something, for whatever reason, the human brain loves art, whether it's spoken, written, fine art, performed, whatever it is. They love it. Music, whatever. For whatever reason, this machine, the human brain, feeds off of that and works. I think it succeeds because there's a lot of anxiety going on inside your brain, whether that manifests for you in a way that is hard for you to get through the day or
Yeah.
whatever. Inside your subconscious, your brain's it's working out problems all the time. Essentially, that's dreams, right? So for whatever reason, art has a tendency or it has an ability to help work through those problems. That's why horror is so successful with young kids and scares, right? Because they're working through their fears. So for whatever reason, artists have an ability to tap into that,
Yeah.
and that's an amazing thing. But in order to be able to do that, it goes back to business and having an ability that Hollywood's really great at turning that into something that they can market. And really, it's a spaghetti against the wall problem. That's how distributors, marketers, and studios and networks and record labels work.
Yeah.
That's how they operate. It's like go to the creatives, have them deliver something, give them a little bit of money to go figure it out. If it works, give them more the next time. If that works, give them a little bit more the next time. That's the system. And if you don't want to play in that system, then you can be Roger Waters, not Roger Waters. Sorry. Who was the guy who made Flamingo? Funny.
Mr. Waters.
Thank you.
What
Exactly.
is his name? Yeah.
I can't remember. Anyway,
Yeah.
a director, he wouldn't make a living in Hollywood today, but he could find an audience and figure out how to do his thing. John Waters.
John Waters.
John Waters could figure out a way to do what he did, which was fringe and weird, and the studios gave him money to do it because it was a novelty, right? He could figure out a way to build a business today, but in order to do that, he'd have to operate in a different fashion, which is not showing up to a financier and just be whatever weird and crazy just to convince them that he can deliver something that's interesting for them. It's a different way of thinking, I think, and that's going to be the future. And it's available now because of the billions of people that these social platforms are able to reach.
Yeah, the Paul brothers can get into really serious fights with people because they can bring 100 million eyeballs to their content, right? They have no business really fighting at the elite level. I'm not saying they're not trained and skilled and all that, but they get into fights because fighters get paid, and getting people paid is really what matters. The other thing I wanted to bring up, by the way, for everybody here, I'll put the link up on the page here. Get Tim's book, and it's Hollywood Accounting. It's a swamp. It's thick, difficult to navigate, smells terrible, but I love it. And there it is, the Amazon link. And just in general, go to Tim's website because there's all kinds of this great stuff. One of the things that every year, and I'm going to do this next month, I go back to my hometown and I talk to the seniors before they graduate, and I just kind of give them like, hey, I'm you from the future. What do you want to ask yourself? To let them talk to me. And I often look, I spend a lot of time smashing what their parents have taught them, about path and everything else. And especially because parents don't know, they say, don't get into music, there's no money there. Don't get into acting or creative things, there's no money in that. And it's good advice because for the most part, there isn't. But there are so many jobs in the industry. I mean, your job, no kid thinks that they want to have what your job was coming up, working on the financial side of projects. And
Right.
yet there are people that find themselves in this situation because they wanted to get into entertainment. Another buddy of mine, he's working his way up, and he's not young, like he's in his 30s now, but he works for Hans Zimmer, and he makes sounds so that Hans Zimmer can make bigger things, right?
Yeah.
So he's like a brick maker for the chapel maker, right? And
Sure.
so it's a dream job, but it's not a job you think of as a kid. As a kid, you think you're going to become Hans Zimmer.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that because I was literally just looking at some statistics that in particular in film production. So there's about 4 or 5 big payroll services that process the payroll for all the crew, which is writers, directors, actors, producers, and then the actual crew who work on movies. They produce about 350,000 W-2s every year. So there's
Wow.
350,000 jobs.
Yeah.
Of those, about 50,000 of them are actors, writers, directors, and producers. The other 300,000 are people who work in the trenches, grips,
Yeah.
electrics, set deck. These are
Yeah.
hard jobs. It's hard work. They're long hours. They're difficult to get into. It's all about networking and getting to know those people. And the most important thing in any of the jobs is proximity to the producers who are making content. Those that have
Right.
stuff on the air and those that have had a movie in the theater or have a record recently out, those are the people who have cash and they have access to distribution. And that's what you should be looking for. And it's super important that you stay connected to those folks. It's tough.
Super important. Yeah. Well, one of the things I often say is if you drive through the Hollywood Hills, you won't know most of the people who own those homes.
It's true.
Gorgeous homes. You're like, wow, who's that? Well, that's a guy or a lady who makes a lot of money making stuff out of other people's stuff, right? It's just
Yeah.
like it's sort of the elevated version of Hans Zimmer. Yes, we need you, Tom, Hanks, Tom Selleck, Tom, whoever. And we're going to take you and make this, attach you to this script. And then I'm going to be the first guy in line to make money, right? And then movie gets made. And they have, you were saying earlier, they throw spaghetti against the wall. For certain brands, they throw a particular kind of spaghetti against the
True.
wall. They don't like
Absolutely
to go, hey, we don't like Alfredo sauce around here. We're not even going to mess with that, right?
right.
And so I had Michael Uslan on the show the other day, and he's like, yes, I am responsible for this comic book explosion of movies, which is good and bad. He said himself, he's like, it's become a little crazy with all of these things, but if Warner Brothers is going to make, I don't know, if there's a number, you probably know it. If it's 20 films a year, well, 18 of those films are already picked. And there's
Yeah.
maybe 2 they're going to mess around with, and that's it. And these numbers that you were talking about, man, it's fascinating. Like there are really only, I don't know, 500 jobs for an Asian guy who can ride a horse, and then there are 500 dudes who already have those jobs. So you have to figure out how you're going to fit into a different category, right? Like if you are a lumbering, bodyguard guy, there are a lot of those guys. So how are you going to do something different? Are you going to create something? And that's why in Hollywood you have writer, director, producer, whatever, so that you can get close to people that have money by showing them that you're a good asset to have around.
Right. And when you start out, you're going to start out doing something that is a derivative work of the person who hired you, right? To your point,
Right.
that they do a particular thing. Like, for example, if you're going to write on CSI and you're not going to pitch CSI ideas. You're going to show up and you're going to write a draft that the showrunners want you to make. They're going to give you an arc. They're going to give you a story point. They're going to give you all the characters, who's in it.
Right.
And your job is to write a draft that they don't have to change a lot, because writing a draft is hard work. And that's why you're hired. So when you start in the business, you're going to be emulating somebody else's work. You're never going to be pitching your ideas to anybody. You might
Right.
once in a while. You're never going to pitch to a network or a studio or anywhere.
Oh
You're
my
going
gosh,
to
this is
pitch
so
to
great. Yeah.
somebody who's then going to take your idea and take it into a studio and take some credit for it. And you may get ripped off, but everybody's going to know at the end of the day that that was your idea,
Right.
as long as you can maintain credit. So
Yeah.
that's how the business starts, as a creative. And it is what it is. And there's no two ways around it. You just have to play this game. And I like to say to creatives, the creatives who have 100 ideas are the ones who win. It's not about how you execute, it's how many ideas you have. Ideas are cheap. The question is, do you have too many ideas and not enough time to execute them?
Right.
Those are the people that I know who succeed in this business. The ones that have 2 or 3 ideas, they come and they leave.
Yeah, yeah. This is a great point, and you're killing it in so many ways, and I love it. The one of the things I say is like, okay, so you've got an idea. Oh, aren't you a precious little thing? You've
Right.
got an idea. Pros never run out of ideas. What pros do is they sort out the idea they can create, they go create it, and then they work on the next one. They're never worried about the idea. The idea is always there.
They
It's
have too
the
many.
other parts of the game.
It's the execution. And it goes back to the comment you made earlier, which is when you're in the creative and you're doing something, there is
Yeah.
nothing else you can do but that thing at the moment. It fills your headspace.
Right.
This is one of the most laborious jobs that exist on the planet. Making stuff. Whether that's editing, whether it's shooting, whether it's writing, directing, whatever. Danny Boyle made 2 movies back to back. I forget what the titles were. And in between the first one and the second one, he directed the Olympic, what do you call it, opening ceremony. And then he went back to the editing of the second movie. And you can kind of tell when you watch that content that he wasn't really in it. It wasn't in his head anymore. And it felt a little stale. I love Danny Boyle. And I want to say Slumdog Millionaire was the first one, and the second one, I can't remember what title it was. But you can, the point I'm making is you can kind of see in that example of a guy who wasn't in it in both in the movie at the same time. And I believe that when you're working on something, just do that one thing until you're finished and then move on to the next. And keep a notebook of your ideas. They'll come back to you. You just got to get them down. And I know a lot of people who actually dictate them into their phone and they show up on their email and they just put them into a file that says ideas and they go flesh them out later.
You don't want to run out of ideas, and you don't want to be like, oh shoot, what was that idea? So you have to capture them and turn them into something, or into a vault, or just know that you're never going to run out. Some people are just fountains of ideas. That's so true. I've met a lot of people like that on the show. I wanted to also bring up talking about writing in the voice of somebody else. And if you want to talk about somebody that's replaceable, be a junior writer on a staff. You know, you're there because they want you there and they want to develop you. But yeah, if you show up with ideas and you don't know how that works, they got someone dying to get in there and get paid less money to take that chair from you. So it's a very, very, very competitive role. We had Krista Vernoff on the show, and Krista figured out how to write in Shonda's voice. And like any good executive producer, you need more people who are you, who get you, that you don't have to teach to be you, or make compromises to have them work with you. And that's what Krista did great was, and she said this on the show. She's like, yeah, I got how Shonda wrote. I got what was supposed to happen. I could create that so she could go and do other things.
Yeah.
There's nothing more valuable than that for someone like Shonda Rhimes, who apparently is not going to run out of ideas.
No, and she is a very prolific producer, and there's no way she can put out the kind of volume that would need to be as a writer writing all their own material and producing the amount of content she makes, amount of movies and TV shows she makes. Aaron Sorkin is a bit of a freak. He can do that, apparently. He has extremely prolific. And in fact, I knew a researcher, quote, researcher for him. He writes everything. But the researching team he has around him that does all the digging and the work for him to just read and then turn that into dialogue and an idea is that's where the money is, you know. And for him, you know, I'm going down a rabbit hole with a particular person who is extremely prolific. Not everybody is. And the example you just gave is a perfect example of a producer who figured out how to help Shonda Rhimes so that she could then excel. And all of these jobs in Hollywood make really good money, and some make exceptionally good money.
Yeah.
You know, writers make $4,000 to $6,000 to $10,000 to $25,000 a week. That's real money. Or they make as much as little as $25,000 an episode, or as much as $150,000 an episode. You might make $1 million writing a screenplay. You could make $750,000 directing. It's hard to get there, but those are the really highly paid folks. But even when you go down to the grip, electric, and camera, the folks working in the trenches who are union jobs, those guys easily take home $100,000. They don't have a life. You know, they don't really have, they're not raising kids. And if they are, their spouse or their partner is the person who really is doing that work for them. I know people who have kids and they have great relationships with their kids, but that's because they have really strong partners. Yeah. This is a business that is, it really is a young person's business. And you do have an expiration date. And when you start in on it, you should think in those terms. And it goes back to the comment you made, which is put away a third, spend a third, put a third into, you know, into savings. You got to figure it out, because at some point you're going to look around and go, God, this is hard work, man. I'm tired. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And that's going to come when you're 40, 45, maybe.
Yeah. It's one of those, you know, we've had so many people on the show that like just bring this up. Allie Willis could write a song out of anything. You know, she wrote September with Earth, Wind, and Fire and all kinds of incredible songs. One of her walls under her house is just platinum records everywhere. That's
amazing.
Incredible, right? But with that comes the, hey, Allie, can you write a song for this? Hey, Allie, can you write a song for this? Hey, Allie, can you know, and she's this, you know, like polymath. She doesn't want to just do writing songs. Yes, she'll do that and that'll pay for the house, but she also wants to do other things. Hey, Allie, hey, Allie, hey, Allie. And then, you know, you get to the point where, so she wrote the theme song for Friends, right? And,
cool.
and it's great. And you know how these numbers work, man. This is so crazy. If I remember the story correctly, she owed a third of a song to Sony. We'll just say Sony. I don't know who the contractor was, but we'll just say Sony. And then the band, the Rembrandts, also owed a portion of a song and happened to be in town. And so they're like, come down to the studio. Like, we don't want to do someone else's work. They're like, come down to the studio. You owe us a song anyhow. Go do this. And so this thing that neither of them wanted to do for some stupid show. And you know how many of these things don't work out. And it ends up being their biggest hit and obviously a big money maker for Ali. But that's this business is they once they figure out that you're good at something like Ali is, they will take you and work you to death until you hate the thing that you're great at because you know you have money in you and they recognize that and they're like, well, let's all make some money. And then the minute you feel like the minute you say no, they will move on, and you're not always wrong about that.
It's true. They will move on. There is no shortage of people who are good at getting in line, but there is a shortage of people who are good at the job. And I
Yeah.
think that's the distinction. And there's one other point I think that's important to remember is that this is a copycat business. Something works. Chris Nolan broke the mold with Inception, right?
Yeah.
That movie turned everything upside down. But the Chris Nolan Inceptions come along once every couple years, maybe 3 or 4. Otherwise, it's just cookie cutter. You're plunking out the same thing over and over until it doesn't work. And then they go
Right.
look for the next same thing. And they only do that with small little, small budgets until they figure out that thing works. Let's go lay into that. This is a
Yeah.
copycat business. You're
It's a
going to
copycat
copy.
business.
It's part of the job. And if that you don't like that, then go do something interesting that you find interesting that may not be commerce. It may just be art that feeds your soul. But
Yeah.
if you want to have a house and you want to have the job and you want to have the money, you're going to have to do the same thing over and over. And there's really no reason to realize that your soul is being robbed. That's up to you. You get to decide whether or not your soul is being robbed. So just make the money and do whatever art you love.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things to talk about here because it's important, and we're gonna slide in another part of the show right after this, but that competition, the people who are out there who are willing to do anything to get that job, anything to keep it, those are your peers. And if
Yep.
you don't want to get your sword that sharp, you are going to have to work very hard to find an alternate way to make a living in that business. Maybe you're indie, maybe you're something else. But yeah, you're right. There's people that will burn up their lives, burn up their heart, give themselves cancer, to do anything. And then the ability at that level, whether you're in music and we'll just use screenwriting, when someone's like, hey, this whole thing's bad, you're the one guy who come to fix things that are bad. I need this draft by noon tomorrow, and you've not seen the project yet, and it's a 120-page screenplay, and you're like, yeah, all right, I'll be back. And then you do something that no new person in Hollywood ever thinks is possible, or like soap people who look at a script every day, every damn day. Like people who got down on people who are in daytime dramas. I've talked to a few of them. Actors who slide over there to get paid for a while, they're like, no, thank you. That is hard work. So
it is.
Your peers are going to absolutely destroy you. When you go and you work for Shakira and you're like, hey, I'm going to hopefully play keys for Shakira, they're going to give you half a second and half a look at, like, this is how the song goes. It goes dun 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 dun, and then boom, they start into it. And if you're not already caught up at pro speed, you don't get that gig. You get one shot and that's it. And every time you blow that, the word gets out that guy, he's not a pro, and it's not fair unless you're a pro. Then you're like, yeah, absolutely, you have to be able to do that to get these incredible gigs.
It's true, and that is just practice. In the music space, I mean, that's one of the reasons I stopped. I was a drummer in high school and elementary. I started playing when I was in the 4th grade, and I played through about my sophomore year in college. And I realized that I didn't want to practice as much as the guys that were better than me, and I wanted to compete with them. And I realized at an early age that being a creative, there's 2 things. One, I didn't want to practice as much to be that good, number one, and number 2. I was the guy with the most obvious ideas in the room. So, if you want the guy with the most obvious ideas in the room, find me. And honestly, no one in Hollywood wants that. So
Right.
I figured out at a young age, at an early part of my career, that I was really good at physical logistics and finance and kind of thinking ahead about human behavior and what people are going to do in the future based on what you know right now. That was my spidey sense. That's what I learned how to do, and really at a young part of my career. And how do you apply money to those problems that are coming down the road or protect for those problems in the future? And that's just experience and time in doing it. And, I was super lucky that I was able to figure that out at a young age and didn't pursue a creative career because honestly, I would have been terrible at it. I would have been really mediocre, and that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what I wanted to be.
Yeah. And the person who can do what you do, it's hard to recognize that, especially if you really are desperate to get in front of that mic. But you're probably one of the best people in Hollywood at your job. And there's probably not very many actors that could even get to where you're at because they have a different skill set. They have a different passion to put the work in. I mean, when you talk to people who've actually worked with Tom Cruise, they're like, you don't get it. You don't get how much time and effort he dedicates to this one singular thing. You know, you don't have to do that. You can go and do other aspects of the creative thing. Speaking of getting paid, let's get both of us paid here real quick. So Tim has got this fantastic book, and if you want to understand more about Hollywood, for sure, go to Amazon and get Tim's book, A Hollywood Accounting. It's a swamp. It's thick. It's difficult to navigate. It smells terrible, but I still love it. Also, go to timtortora.com. And look, his blog is timely. It's on the money. You're getting expert advice. There's all kinds of great stuff in there. I spent the whole morning looking at that stuff going, yep, this is going to be an easy show because you and I can talk about this stuff all day. And then if you want to get Pedro paid, you go to breakitdownshow.com, go to the PayPal link, click on that, and then just put a little bit of money in each month. You can invent whatever subscription you want. You want me to do something for you? Let me know. The point here is not like, hey, go to Patreon. I don't need Patreon. I need you and I need me. $5, $10, 20, whatever it is that you want to do. You want to buy me and take a gas. All that stuff goes into me maintaining the equipment, which is not cheap, getting on the road to try to go do shows remotely like we did with Bruce Dickinson the other day. These things all cost money, and this is a great way to support me and allow me to go out and do what needs to be done. All right, back to Tim because he's the guest, and it's important to talk to you. Anything you want? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, man. Do you want to look back at anything and say, hey, we should talk about this a little bit more, or you maybe think about this? Where do you want to start off this second half?
I think, well, at the moment, what the thing that I'm really focused on is training young people to come to the business and how do you get integrated and how do you get connected when you don't know anyone. I was that kid, whatever, 35 years ago in 1985 when I got a job. I was a freshman in college, I think. And I got the job as a tape op in a recording studio, which then led to me getting a marketing degree. And then I wound up working in advertising for a studio for Columbia Pictures, worked on big features. And then I left that job to go work in physical production. When I was about 25, 24 years old, I decided I didn't want to work in marketing. It wasn't my thing. I really wanted to get back to making movies. And I learned at an early age from some people about the idea of informational interviews. How do you get connected? It wasn't as easy 35 years ago as it is today to do research about projects. Who works on what? So I wrote a book about here's a method for you got to pick the vertical you're working in that you want to work in. What are your favorite shows? Who are the people that make them? How do you connect with those people? And you're going to have to figure out who to connect with, right? Like you said, the staff writer. Are you going to get to Joss Whedon on one of his shows, or are you going to get to one of his staff writers? You're not going to get to Joss Whedon. Never going to happen. And if you do, he's not going to give you a job. Right. So, you need to figure out who the assistants are, who the staffs are, who the people are, and you want to sit down and have an informational interview with them and just say, how'd you get to where you are? I want to do that job. Yeah. And you just sit and listen. You don't pitch anything. You don't ask for a job. At the end, you ask if anybody else you can talk to. Yeah. And then you tell them at the end, look, I'm Tim. I'm looking for a job as a set PA on episodic television, single camera. If you know anybody who's looking, feel free to throw my credits around. And I passed out my resume. I got a job on Dream On as a PA with 3 days of guaranteed work. 3 days of guaranteed work. I stayed for a season and a quarter, and then I moved up and started working in finance at Disney. So that's how it starts. And it begins small and it explodes from there. And you can excel really fast. And that's the thing I'm spending a lot of time on now is training people. And like I said, I wrote a book about the method of getting connected in this business, at least the method I think that works.
Yeah. Tony Toast has been on the show. Tony Toast is a guy who, like, if you look on the outside, you're like, wow, he went from writing on some episodes of Longmire to executive director or producing the thing. Yeah, it must have been easy for him. And then he is a remarkable case where he did walk in and get a really great job right from the start. And it happened to be characterizing what was really his life coming up. And he had a PhD in English. But these things all took, even without like the show, it all took 25 years to put together. He had to go live in trailer parks on the edge of an Indian reservation and then
Right.
learn how to write at the PhD level, realize when he got his sweet academic gig that was not so sweet. He didn't want to do that. And then be connected to a person who did a similar thing to him and made True Detectives. These things, these stories do happen, but there's a lot of preparation in that luck. And I don't want to walk past that. So when you go to meet that person, you want to be prepared. You want to constantly be thinking about what your pitch is. Even getting someone like Tony's busy. He's an executive producer. He's always trying to get things done. He maybe has 5 to 10 hours, 10 hours, not even 10, 5 hours a week free for him to do something that he wants to do. Does he want to spend it with you? How do you get someone's time like Tony? And Tony's not the biggest name in Hollywood.
Right.
He's successful, but there's a lot of executive producers above him on executive producer mountain. How do you get someone's time if they're as successful as Tony and you're running writing rooms and pitching ideas and getting series made for a variety of different networks?
I think you get their attention in two ways. One, you show up understanding their part in the business, what they do and how they fit into it,
Right.
and then understanding the business just generally, right? So I'm out there everywhere in social, and I get DMs all the time and emails about, hey man, will you read my script? Will you do my movie? Will you read?
Yes.
And it's like, no, I'm not going to I don't have that kind of time. And
Right.
if I did, that's not what I do. I can't
Right.
help you. I haven't been in creative since I worked for Harpo Films, and that was going on 20 years.
Yeah.
So since I last worked there, I've been a finance guy. I got a DM and a text from a woman who was graduating with an accounting degree from Northridge, Cal State Northridge. She said, "Hey, I'm interested in production finance, production accounting. I know nothing about it. Can I get 10 minutes with you to talk about it?" I was like, now this is a woman who understands my place in this business and what I do and how I can help her. And I think that begins with doing the research about the people you're working with, right? If you want to work in reality television, are you going to go beat up Tony or anybody in that space who does dramatic TV to go work in reality? You're just not. You have to understand the vertical that you work in, who the producers are who make content in that vertical. I shouldn't say content. It's movies and TV. I don't like content. Content's what you find on YouTube, right? Which is fine. I'm not putting that down. It's just they're different things.
We're on YouTube now. It's great, right? It's just not for this.
I love YouTube. I mean, are you kidding me? I probably give them 20 hours of my weekend every weekend, right? But watching videos. But nonetheless, I think knowing who those people are and what their space is in the business. Are you going to ask Tony to read your screenplay? No. Can you ask him how he got to the place in the career and how he got started? Okay. Yeah. And then maybe at the end you might give him a half-paid lead sheet of an idea if he asks, but don't expect him to read your screenplay. You shouldn't have to break an entire story and write 120 pages of a screenplay or an episode of a TV show because no one has time for it. So keep it simple, keep it small.
Yeah.
An executive like him, maybe he'll read 2 pages of material that you might have, but that's about it. You literally have 5. To your point, you have, as a keyboard player, you sit down with Shakira, you got to know the part. If you don't know the part, you're out. Next guy.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing with writers and directors. If you want to be a director, make a piece that's 2 minutes long. Make it interesting, make it flashy, or make it dramatic and interesting, and tell a story in 2 minutes time. Then you'll get someone's attention, but you're not going to get their attention based on a big long form material.
I'm gonna use this as a segue to ask this next question, but a guy that we know is a veteran. His name is Michael Broderick. He's an actor. He does a lot of procedural work. He looks like a cop, or he looks like a guy who could live on the streets. He's a great actor and fucking a wonderful guy. I love that guy. And he wanted to get a role in. So there's a guy named Jack Carr who's a SEAL turned thriller, like military thriller writer, and a lot of his work was bought by a new studio started by, I can't remember the guy's name. He's one of the most successful people in Hollywood. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. They're going to make all this stuff. I think they already have a deal with Amazon, right? And so Michael's like, I want to play in that series. I want a job. And so he went out and wrote, his best version of a screenplay. He's not a writer, and gave it to one of his military friends who is a paid screenwriter. And he's like, oh man, we can fix this thing up. And then he grabbed another military guy, veteran, and they shot this thing, one scene in a bar, playing pool, and so you had a professional writer, a professional actor, and a professional actor, and it's much, and for 1,100, maybe not even $2,000, they shot this 11-minute video on YouTube in the universe of, and asked Jack Carr's permission. Of course, Jack says yes, and so they made this 11-minute video in the universe that Jack Wright has created. And you know what happens? All three of those dudes get gigs because doing different, because they made something and it's good and it's short, and you're like, well, I want to see more of that. And it was what I call an in-between-quel, right? Like, this is just moments in life in between all of the big action movies as you piece together this thing. So you can absolutely do it. And this, yes, Michael has connections in Hollywood, but that doesn't mean that you and your friends can't go out and do your own version of that. And that happens all the time. If producers like, oh man, I'm kind of in between musical clients, I'm going to make an album. They make an album. It's like a calling card, it's a piece of business for them.
Yeah, so many young filmmakers focus on matching what they see in big movies. Lots of set design, big lighting, beautiful cinematography. The truth is, creative people who are looking for young talent, they never care about any of that. They want to know that you can tell a story, that you can hire actors who are good, recognize good acting, and get them on screen, that you can cut something into a piece that's interesting, because 75% of the work happens in the cutting room. It's so true. And can you finish it in a way that's professional, or have you made something that's boring and uninteresting that doesn't actually tell a story? So this is a time in the evolution of creation of TV and movies where you can make anything using your phone. In fact, Sean Baker did it with a movie called Tangerine, and that movie was and he won a bunch of awards and went on to go do a Willem Dafoe movie called The Florida Project and win more awards with that. But Tangerine was a movie he made for, I want to say, like 20 grand. And he did it because he didn't want to go out and raise money. He wanted to make a movie, and he's like, look, I got this much money and I'm going to do it with my cell phone. And he did. And it turned out to be, Sean's an extremely adept filmmaker and extremely talented. So, but he's skilled. He tried things. He uses what he has access to, and he's telling stories. That's the job. It's not, life is boring. You have to cut out the what we refer to as the shoe leather. You got to cut out the noise that's uninteresting and boring. The guy walking up the steps to the door to a confrontation. Do you really want to watch a guy for 30 seconds walk up the front steps of a door? No. You want to see the confrontation. You want to see the acting. So cut out the shoe leather, get to the point, tell your story, and do it in a timely fashion so people can make a decision about your skill. That's it.
I want to stay in this little area here because part of the reason I brought this up is, okay, you're not Michael Broderick and you don't have you're trying to shoot a thing, but you don't have access to $20,000. That can be a thing. How do you scale your YouTube? Like these people edit all kinds of insane things. I saw this thing the other day with a bunch of dancers from the golden era of Hollywood dancing to Uptown Funk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes some talent to do that. Like you are not without talent. And so you put that out there. How do you start to scale that? Like, I would love to start making podcasts for, Amazon or Netflix. Anytime they have a series come out, like, they should have a podcast. That should just be a thing. How do you scale? How do you get those meetings so you can be like, you have people already taking your stuff and making a podcast about it. Why don't you all do that? How do you scale that? How do you get those meetings?
So if you're the person making creative and trying to get yourself noticed, right? And you do begin to get noticed. You start with, and I'm talking about writers, directors, actors, producers, the creatives, right? Those folks, you have to get connected to the development executives within the companies and the structure of the studios, the streamers, and the networks, right? So on the top of the list, there's Netflix, Hulu, Sony, Warner Brothers, you know them. Right. And then there's the Lifetime, Hallmark, TNT. Right. That's the networks, the studios, and the streamers. Underneath that apparatus are the producers who actually make content. And they are the Joel Silvers of the world, the Akiva Goldsman, Steven Soderbergh, Clooney, and you've seen those companies, right?
Right.
There's a lot of smaller ones too, but they're usually attached to some big director, writer, or actor. And then within those organizations, they have a development staff. The development staff has a low-level creative executive. That's the title of this person. Or they have a receptionist or an assistant or something. Are you going to get to the VP of development at Silver Pictures? Not going to happen. Are you going to get to the creative executive? Yeah, you might. And you may one day find that you're sitting and talking to that person, but the first step is knowing who those people are. And the way
Mhm.
you know who they are is by doing the research. You read the trades, you poke around, you create a list, you look at IMDb Pro, or just IMDb is fine, to figure out who's working on these projects and who is named as development executive, creative executive, VP of development. That's where you get noticed as a director, a writer, or an actor, and more as a writer director, less as an actor. That usually comes up through the casting department, right? You need to know casting directors, and in that you need to get to know those people. Are you going to meet the casting director at the top? No, you're going to get to know their associate, and you're going to get to know their assistant, and you're going to create a relationship with those folks. And it's all networking. It's all talking to people and talking about yourself. If you're
Mm.
shucks, I don't want to talk about myself because my grandfather told me that I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to be humble. Bullshit. Stop it. You need to talk about yourself. You don't have to be an arrogant idiot, but you do need to talk about yourself and tell people what you want to do, right? If they don't know what you want to do, they can't help you. And you have
Yeah.
to know what you want to do. That's where it begins. That's how
All
you
right. So
start.
I want to talk to the finance guy. So you say, hey, $20,000, they make this project and it turns
Yeah,
into this career defining moment. My guy on the other side over there, he's like, I can raise $20,000. I'm not afraid of asking 150 of my friends. I can put $20,000 together.
right.
Is that enough money? Like the other thing is like, you gotta, John, who's co-founder of the show, he's working on building a documentary, and he's talking to Fran Strine. Fran is a friend of the show, and Fran's like, first thing you need to do is get $10,000, not to make the thing, but to hire the lawyers that you have to have, hire
Yeah.
a line producer, and start figuring out how much things cost. Let's talk about that. Like, how do you figure out, okay, we're going to rent a red camera. Well, maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to rent something else because this thing is $200 a day versus $2,000 a day.
Well, that's all a function of a budget, right? And it begins with lawyers. So every project, you have to have a clean chain of title. If you can't show to a distributor or someone who would buy your content or your movie or your TV show that you own the idea from beginning to end, that means the writer, the director, the actor, and all the crew that work in this endeavor. And I mean all the crew. So a production designer who draws something on a piece of paper and they hang it up on a wall as a piece of art, they've perfected copyright. Unless you hire them as a work for hire and transfer all of their rights into that title, into that entity, you actually can't ever sell your movie because you don't own the rights, right?
Right.
It's that cellular, it's that binary. That begins with a lawyer. And you can find lawyers who will work with you. But they're hard to find, they're expensive, and that one's tough. But you need to figure out the legal part of it. And you can find some forms that to collect from everybody. So that's where it starts, right? Then you need to do a budget. And budgeting is nothing more than a function of how much money you have, right? If you got 10 or you got $100,000, let's say you raise 100,000 to make a movie, and I suggest you make a movie. If you're gonna make something and you have some money, make a feature. I met a guy who made a horror picture in his garage for $600, sold it internationally for like 10 or 12 grand, right? Not a huge amount of money, but he started with 600. It launched his career. So it begins with doing a budget. It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to have someone like myself who has experience doing budgets in the trenches to be on your side. You don't have to have them do an entire budget for you, but you could have them train you how to actually create a budget because it's cookie cutter, man. It's sitting in front of an Excel spreadsheet or Movie Magic budgeting or whatever you're going to use to do it. It's building a budget and it's just breaking all the pieces down into tiny little bite-sized pieces and then putting a number to that. And then once you have a budget, then you go spend whatever money you have to or raise money to make your movie. And it really kind of begins with those two elements. And then you have to be connected to the folks who are going to give you money. And that's getting connected to development staffs. I've sort of glossed over it really quickly. It's a lot of work. I'll be honest
Yeah.
with you. And to get someone on your team who will help you, who's interested in your idea, who is a line producer or a unit production manager or someone of that ilk, it's helpful to have. And if you can find those folks and get connected and get their time, that's probably a place I would start if you're a creative in terms of building your team. Because that's without knowing how much money you're going to spend or how much money you have or how much your idea is going to cost. It it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
It's not it's you're kind of fishing in the big giant ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. Without a map or a compass.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna go ask you for a bunch of money, but I really don't know how all this stuff works. How do you learn what you can expect? Because it's one thing to make a movie, hit your budget and everything else. That's a whole other thing to go to the movie market and sell it. I mean, great. You sold it for $12,000. Maybe there was 24 in that thing. Who knows?
Yeah,
Maybe you don't sell it. That's even worse.
that happens all the time, and that's tough. It happens. There's a lot of no-name titles. If there's one thing I say to any filmmaker, which is if you're going to sell your movie into the markets, you got to have one thing in it, and that's a known actor. Even if it's Lou Diamond Phillips, and I don't have anything against him. I only use him because in the late '80s there were probably 200 projects rolling around the markets in international space with Lou Diamond Phillips attached to them because he
Right.
was a sale. People in the U.S. were like, Lou Diamond Phillips, really? Does he work? Yeah. And internationally, he's a draw. He's a draw. So
Yeah.
you need to get somebody in your movie who has a name that has marquee value in the markets, not in the retail space, but in the markets where you're going to sell your movie. You got to have somebody in it. Otherwise, they just don't care. They're not going to buy anything.
We just spent the better part of an hour describing how effing impossible it is to make a movie, to have a project, to have a career, and everything. Let's give people some hope on what really is possible. And then, how the heck do you look? You did it early, you said so, but how do you divine maybe where your sweet spot is? Everybody wants to be the star and go to the Oscars and all that kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
most everybody, as you said earlier, 300,000 of those people aren't doing that. So, how do you sort this out, and how possible is all this stuff?
It's all very possible. And you sort it out by first deciding what is it you want to do. That's where it begins, right? You want to be a writer, director, actor, crew, producer, whatever. And then within crew, there's a huge ocean of what those jobs are. What do you want to do? And then I think if you come here in the creative pursuits, you need to give yourself 3 to 5 years max. If after 3 to 5 years, you don't know anyone, you haven't got any kind of tangible meeting or audition or whatever in the industry or someone to buy your material, the likelihood is you're probably not skilled enough or you haven't figured out how to tap into the industry. So then and that's a kind of a judgment you have to make for yourself. What do you want to do, and how long do you want to spend endeavoring in this particular thing? And as you're endeavoring, let's say you get down to the end and you didn't figure out how to do that thing. Look around you and go, what else can I do? If I really want to work in this business, what else could I do that would satisfy me creatively? And it's maybe not working as a director, right? And then figuring out what your skills are. And if you've been around it enough and working with people who really are connected and paying, then I think you'll figure out what that thing is. I was able to figure that out at an early part of my career, so I was really lucky. And you have to be absolutely candid and honest with yourself. You don't have to be honest with everybody else, but you need to be honest with yourself. And if you can do that, I think you can find a way to make a living in this business. And almost every job, once you get past the entry level jobs, are well paying jobs. They're upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 jobs.
And I would also say, don't ever fear asking, but learn how to ask. Because it's one thing to be like a hick and a rube and come off the street and ask, and maybe that works every now and then. But to really learn how to ask someone, to know what time it is, know what's expected. Boy, and there's people that will tell you. I mean, that's a good place to start, I think. And I'm not the expert like you are in your field, but I from what I do, understanding these things take time. And if there's a project, yeah, I'm going to talk to you when I have a project to talk about. No project right now. And so you learn to be patient. You learn to be persistent. You learn to be polite. Those are the things that I try to teach people when they say, how do you book all these people for your podcast? But there's a method to that. Yeah. And you ask. Yeah.
Like you said, it begins with asking. And to some extent, it's learning the nomenclature, right? It's what's the language? What's the beat? How does that work? And that comes with not a lot of time. You can learn it pretty quick. But you ask and you get connected. This is a social business. If your predilection is sitting on the couch in your underwear playing games, then the likelihood is you're going to have a struggle here in Hollywood or in the music business. But if you're gregarious and you're willing to put yourself out there and you're willing to be embarrassed on a regular basis, then you can succeed at it. There's no downside, honestly.
Yeah.
And being embarrassed is really just your own right? It's
Yeah,
your own
it's
life.
your own, yeah.
And what I say to people often, especially young people, most folks, when you're talking about to them, they don't care about you. They care about themselves.
Right,
When they're telling you that you can't do something, they're projecting their own fears on you, not yours. So you should ignore those things unless you have an eye and one hump, and you plan on playing Beauty and not the Beast.
right.
Then you have to be candid with yourself about that. But um, I think most people, when you're talking to them, they're actually not dispensing advice for you. They're dispensing their own. They're just manifesting their own fears, and take that with a grain of salt. You don't have to call them out on it. Just go, okay, cool, thanks. Moving
Yeah,
on. Next.
yeah, yeah. And if you do go on an audition and you don't get it, recognize that casting director knows you exist now, and
Exactly.
maybe you're not the right person for this role, and it's not you at all, it's the role, and you aren't the same. And the next job, they might be like, oh, get that guy, go get
And
that team guy, he was good for this.
an actor's job is to audition until it's not, and that takes time.
Oh
So
boy,
if you say to yourself, I'm not a working actor, all I do is get auditions, that's your job.
right.
It is the job. It's an unpaid job. It's a shitty job, but it is the job. So you are a working actor if you're getting auditions. That in itself is a skill, and it is the first step in the job of becoming a paid actor.
All right, man, I'm gonna wrap this thing up. Anything in closing?
Nothing. I mean, we've talked a lot about the creative and about the industry, and like you said, how hard it is. It's really not that hard. It is, you have to understand it. You got to break it down. You got to get to people. You have to understand who the people are, and who are in it, who are actually working for producers who are making stuff for TV and features. And then you have to get connected to those people. Be social, be friends, go do movies, go hang out, find things that you all have creative interest in, and you build a network. And that's all it is. It's a business of networking and referrals. And until you figure that out, you're going to struggle.
All right, stand by for a second, Tim. I'll be right back to you. Let me shut this thing down. Thanks, everybody. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.